Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to you by the Which Side Media Collective. All month long, we're offering gift cards for 25% off. So if you get yourself a $100 gift card, it'd be $75. If you get yourself a $1 gift card, it'd be 75 cents.
Do we offer $1 gift cards?
We don't, but it would be.
Go get a $1 gift card today.
Just use code GIFTCARD25. We picked up some anti-racist neighborhood watch stickers, so while supplies last, we'll be throwing those into orders and helping support that project.
This is episode 212.
Yeah, this is another lecture series. It was presented at the Resistance Ecology Conference in 2015 in Portland, Oregon. It was recorded by Jeff Wirth from Burning Hearts Media. It's called Resistance and Repression. It was presented by Lauren Regan, Jonathan Paul, and Amanda Schemkes.
We had Lauren on a long time ago. I'd love to have her on again.
Yeah, and I'd love to get Jonathan on too.
We have Amanda coming on pretty soon, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
So check out this lecture from the Resistance Ecology Conference and then look for all of their episodes individually. Hey, Jordan, what news and events we have going on this week?
Well, unfortunately, around North Dakota and the Standing Rock area, there was a grand jury that was called and someone was issued a subpoena. So we're making the grand jury resistance scene that I did available for free on the Which Side Media Collective. So just go to whichsidecollective.org. You can get a digital copy for free. The print copy is also free, but it still does charge shipping. We just need to create a culture of resistance and mobilize, publicize, and educate ourselves about grand jury resistance and resist grand juries when we're subpoenaed to them.
Fuck grand juries.
Yeah, fuck a grand jury. This week's listener shout out, or should I call it a listener call out, comes from David Watts. David wanted to say, my first shout out goes out to all the people who claim not to be speciesist. Maybe Gary Francione, for one, would consider himself to be not a species. To him, and all those of similar thinking, I would ask you all to consider this. And you can insert a drum roll here. Civilization is speciesist. Listeners, take time to think about that. Thanks, David.
I sincerely hope you enjoy this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Resistance and Repression panel. My name is Lauren Regan. I'm the Executive Director and Staff Attorney of the Civil Liberties Defense Center. We are an organization based in Eugene that focuses on defending activists, and that includes folks that are charged criminally in federal and state and local courts, but we also represent folks that end up being the victims of slap suits. And we also sue cops and federal agencies for police misconduct and illegal spying. So we're kind of one-stop shop for activist legal issues. And if you appreciate the work that we do, we are always excited to get new members. And just to put in a plug, right now we are fundraising because we are hiring Amanda as the second staff attorney for CLDC this fall. And if you would like to support us being able to pay her a living wage, now is the time to make donations.
I make you a little nervous.
So the intent of this panel is to basically talk about repression, whether that's government or corporate. What we mean by that word is when the government and corporations attempt to silence us, attempt to make our jobs more difficult. Back in the 60s and 70s, we had the COINTELPRO era, which was when there literally was a federal program that was outed as, intentionally trying to interfere, basically take down political movements that the government felt were a threat to the status quo. And that's sort of the core concept of a lot of repression. And the animal rights movement is also very fair game for this type of repression, more so maybe now than ever before. As more and more people become concerned with factory farms and hormone-laden food, and when social norms begin to shift a little bit and all of a sudden it's no longer cool or appropriate to be wearing a fox coat, for instance, or people are choosing to buy products that are not based on animal experimentation. As more and more of society kind of wraps their heads and their ethics around some of these issues, the corporations and the government that is beholden to those corporations become more and more desperate to kind of hold on to what was, to hold on to that status quo. And in those times, particularly when movements become successful, become more popular, become larger, that is often the time where we will see the government and corporations really ratchet up their attacks on those movements and activists. So today we're going to kind of focus on two main components. One is going to focus on the history of the animal rights movement in both sustaining the attacks by government and corporations and how the movement overcame those attacks, what worked and what didn't work historically. And then we're going to look at a few of the more common types of repression that we're seeing right now within the animal rights movement. And primarily, we're going to talk about slap suits and corporate spying, and we'll just touch a little bit on grand juries. And I will warn you, I have been losing my voice for the last 24 hours, so please bear with me. So with me on this panel is Jonathan Hall, who really needs no introduction, but he has been an animal rights and environmental activist since the 1980s. He's had multiple experiences with government and corporate repression. He's going to start us off with sort of the historical perspective. And then to my left is Amanda Schemkes, who, as I mentioned, just graduated from law school, is an active part of the No New Animal Labs campaign that is sort of highlighted this weekend at the conference, and soon to be my cohort at the CLDC. And so with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Jonathan. And that's Susanna.
That's the most important one here. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to stand. So for some reason, I feel a little bit easier if I stand and talk. So Lauren wanted me over here anyway. So here I am. Yeah, always get what you want. So when I first became an activist back in the 80s, I was really fascinated by other movements, and I was really fascinated by the oppression of other movements. And so I researched it, I studied, I read books on it, and I actually got pretty understanding of how government oppression goes on to political movements. And at that point in the 80s, and early 90s, when I was doing a lot of research or reading on this, it was mostly all the oppression against, like, the American Indian movement, Black Panther movement, and some of the peace movement. I was involved in the helping Judy Berry try to identify informants for the paperwork after the government tried to assassinate her back in 1990. So I had a real fascination with all this stuff, and probably I wish I didn't now, because then it started coming down on me. So there were a few different things that I ended up. The first thing that happened was I got subpoenaed to a grand jury, which is, everyone probably is aware that if you've been in the animal rights movement for a while, there's always grand juries popping up here and there somewhere. But it was back in 1992, and first time I ever could vote, I voted for Bill Clinton, and by 5 o'clock that night I was in jail. So I thought there was something weird about all that, but because I never voted before. But since I've been aware of it, I was actually in Eugene when I got actually physically subpoenaed, and it was a little bit intimidating because I got Well, it wasn't really that intimidating. It was kind of humorous in some way because I was actually in a parking lot getting in my car. Of course, it's always the parking lot scene like in a movie, right? You know, where it's, you always know when someone's in a movie, walking in a parking lot in a movie, something's going to happen. Well, I'm walking in a parking lot, unlock my door, and there's two men standing next to me, and they both have trench coats on and these wool hats, these kind of wool hats with the little feathers in them. And they said, "Mr. Paul?" And I said, "Yes." And they go, "Do you know who we are?" I said, "Yeah, you're the FBI." And I was like, and I said, "You look just like the FBI in the movie." So, I mean, it's like, and one guy was like this tall, and the other guy was this tall. So, anyway, so they subpoenaed me. I got subpoenaed, and I could go into other funny things about that, but I'm not going to waste my time. But generally, I ended up going. Some people, there had only been one person before me, the animal rights movement, had gone to jail under a grand jury for not testifying. And that was this guy, Henry Hutto, and he spent 45 days in jail. So my support group and my people, we already kind of knew that we had already had a little bit of experience in this. So it wasn't totally brand new to us. So, of course, I went into the grand jury, and I wouldn't testify. So, and they were asking about everyone. And part of grand juries are, as we all know, grand juries in the legal field. I've got to turn my timer on. So
You're good. I'll give you a...
You give me a 2-minute warning?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, I mean, obviously we know part of grand juries is to indict people, take them to trial and all that stuff, and they happen in the daily going on of the whole justice, whatever you want to call it. But they also have taken this whole process and used it against political movements, basically to shut them down, to oppress them, to gain information and all that. And luckily I was aware, I got that, I kind of understood that. So when they took me in the grand jury, I was like, I don't say nothing, and, well, I wish I was that tough. But what I really said under my Fifth Amendment right, I have the right not to testify and all this stuff. So, they got really frustrated, and what I found out was that they were actually prying even bigger than just the people they said they were looking for. I mean, the pictures they put out in front were people from all ranges of movements. And I knew all the people, but of course I didn't tell them I knew them. Of course they probably knew I knew them, but I wasn't going to tell them anyway. And then they were like, "We're going to put you in jail. So, we're going to take you to the judge," because they found they wanted to find me in contempt. Took me to the judge. My sister, who was with me, I have to tell you this part, it's really cool, because she was a firefighter for San Francisco Fire. She's this really tough woman, right? And she's in the audience, and the judge goes, "Why aren't you going to testify?" And I said, "Well, if I have the right to speak, and if I have the right to free speech, then I have the right not to speak, and that's my choice, Your Honor." And he goes, "Well, you're going to jail." And my sister flipped out. Like, I looked around, and my sister is throwing the marshals are on her, and she's literally got these guys strewn out all over the benches, freaking out on the judge. And the judge is like, "Mr. Paul, can you control your sister?" And I said, "No, I can't." So that sort of went on. It was an honorable thing, but they put me in the jail cell. They stripped me naked to try and even degrade me even more, which I didn't really care, because it's like, I don't care about that stuff. So it didn't really bother me, but I thought it was kind of odd. And all the cops were coming in trying to ask me more questions while I'm standing there naked. So it was trying to make me as vulnerable as I can. But, through that whole process, the one thing I always remember is this is nothing to what other people go through. I have I don't feel like I can ever really complain about the oppression that I've gone through, because it's really nothing compared to what other political activists have gone through. What other animals have gone through, the suffering they go through. So, and the suffering, obviously, of just people in general and anything. So I haven't really complained about it that much. But when you see their game and you don't play it and you fight it, that's the most satisfying thing I ever had. So I ended up spending 6 months in jail until they finally we filed we filed the Grumbles motion, which is actually not because I was grumbling about being in jail, but more because they were political peace activists who were thrown in a grand jury jail back in the 10, 15 years before, and their last names were Grumbles, and they basically filed a motion saying, this is punishment, this is not coercion, so you have to release them, because the idea of putting me in jail was to coerce me to testify and give information. So we filed the Grumbles motion, and I was just about, and then we were fighting back other ways too. We were having protests outside the jail. Well, I wasn't, because I was in the jail, but my family, my friends, and all that were protesting all outside the jail. for quite a few times. We had a lot of media coming in, and it freaked the government out, and they let me go. They released me. So I beat them on that. But after that happened, they started using the same tactic on other people in both Earthburst and the animal rights movement. And I already made a precedent of 6 months. So no one could really stay longer than me because they could file that. So everyone who was going in after me knew the max they would do would be 6 months because it would be really hard for the government to justify them staying longer because I had set a precedent. So, I mean, they changed their tactics and tried to split up. They'd release someone, then bring them back again and put them back in jail. So their total was more than 6 months, and they had a gap in between. They tried that, but the best thing about it for me was resisting them was that everyone knew that they could do the same thing. So it was like, because Henry, before me, Henry Hutto, he passed away a number of years ago, he committed suicide, but he did the same thing. So he inspired me to know that, hey, Henry can do it, I can do it. If I can do it, anyone else can do it. And there was actually a line of people who came in after me. And pretty much all those people didn't testify. And so, so by using grand juries, that's the way they're getting information out on people. And of course, there's infiltration. There's COINTELPRO, which they claim they don't use anymore, what they do. I got caught in the COINTELPRO, which is counterintelligence operations. I got caught in one and there was an assassination attempt on my life. That didn't go through, but it was within 4 miles of my house, the person who was coming down to do it. And that was all involved with the FBI, putting out misinformation. Same thing they did with the Black Panthers, same thing they did with the American Indian movement. That cost a number of people their lives within those movements from each other. So the government's going to come in and try and get you internally. They're going to try and disrupt it, they're going to spread lies. And of course, as people, we're not always the most direct people to each other, so everyone starts talking and this and that, and everyone gets all worked up, and then something happens, and then it implodes. So
it adds stress and paranoia.
It adds stress and paranoia, and that's what they do. Let's just go right in the middle. And but if you know that's how they work, and you start seeing this stuff, or you start seeing some accusations going around a person, maybe it's better to go up and just talk to them straight up. Say, hey, I've been hearing that there's this rumor going around that you've been saying stuff about people or you're a snitch. Let's deal with this. Instead of just like hiding behind or not being forward with it with people, not being direct. And I think that they use that weakness in us because I think inherently people it's easier not to have to deal with stuff straight up. I think everyone at some point in your life has a hard time just going straight up to someone and saying, this is what I feel that you've been doing and I don't like it. Does everyone agree? I mean, we all have that in us, and we have to be able to go beyond that, to not allow that to happen, because those types of things really disrupt movements, and it's proved to work before, and it continues to work, even though they claim not to use COINTELPRO, they just do it in different ways. They try to do it more subtly, or, so, these are the kinds of things that we can look at it two ways. One, they want to stop us, and two, they want to stop us because the status quo doesn't want us to continue what we're doing, because everything what we do is environmentalists or animal rights activists or human rights activists, indigenous peoples activists, gay rights activists, anything of all that, which is all the same thing. The government can't have that because the government, the machines of the corporations and the machines of the government all run on oppression. That's all it is, either earth extraction, animal oppression against other people, and all that. So you look at it both ways. They want you to stop, or think about it like, if they are oppressing me, then maybe I'm actually getting something done. So there's this quote from a friend of mine that said, which I don't know if you should all take this to heart, but if you do, you do, but he said that if the FBI are not looking into you, maybe you should reconsider what you're doing for the earth today. So, that's it's a hardcore statement, but it's got some truth in it. It's kind of interesting. But, we really got to understand what can happen in this movement. We have to look at other movements, and we have to try and understand the other movements and what's happened to them. And there's a lot of great information out there. There's a lot of great books. Spirit of Crazy Horse is a great book. It talks all about it. There's I wish I could remember because there are books from the 90s, but there's a great book on I think it's the COINTELPRO book on the American Indian movement and the Black Panther movement. It's great, lots of great information. So all that stuff is out there. You just got to kind of find it. But
Hey, Jonathan, can I add one thing?
Yeah.
So, and you can then jive off of this, but, one thing that I see a lot in the activist world is that activists overestimate the accuracy and the proficiency of the FBI or government agents. We give them a lot more credit than they actually are due. Like, we think that they are smarter and know better than really what is the case. Because when we read police reports and discovery, we realize often how totally off they are, especially when they are trying to psychologically profile communities. And maybe you could use the Green Scare to give a real-life example of that, and also just as an example of another form of repression.
Yeah. So I was arrested in the Green Scare back from an action I did in 1997, and I ended up serving time. But the reason why I did was because some people snitched on me. And what happened was there was a group of people. The FBI did their profiles and started doing the arrests, and then people started talking and talking. And of all those people, there was only really, truly two of us that were completely had our mouths shut, did not testify, and that was me and Daniel McGowan. Having said that, I think the government likes to use fear. I don't know if this is what you're getting to, but they obviously like to use fear and intimidation to make people talk, and to make people feel like that they're going to get a better deal if they just talk and they snitch everyone out. But really, even though I got a little extra time, I got the better deal because I didn't tell anyone. You guys are my people. We all work together on this, and there is no way I'm going to ever, talk about other people, about the movement to the entity that wants to destroy it itself. But I think in the part of the Green Scare, and you can elaborate on this a little bit if you want, is that the intimidation and the fear. It's like, just remember that when you guys are involved in anything, I don't care what it is, above ground, letter writing campaigns, shack-style campaigns, whatever you're doing, just remember that they will always try and find a way to stop you, and you just need to always keep your vision, keep what you have in your vision, and keep going for that, because they will always want to try and stop you, because that machine that's out there that's eating up this whole planet does not want you to be in its way. And they will eat you up and try and spit you out, but you can hold strong and do it. But intimidation, it's happened every time in every movement. We can see it all the time. And it's been there, and it's, we can get through it because I've been in prison twice. I've had an assassination attempt on my life once, which I don't recommend anyone getting involved in, okay, so don't go there. And I've had infiltrators in my life who have infiltrated me, and I feel a little bit embarrassed that I wish I was one of these people that was like, no one ever got through my wall of security, but they did, and that was the reality of it. And, they're always going to try and do that, and I guess, when it really comes down to is that we need to just be vigilant, and we need to just keep moving forward, and always remember that there might be someone who's going to try and disrupt you. And you see those red flags come up, when you feel see that red flag or feel that gut in your feeling, maybe you should think about it a little bit.
So Jonathan's too modest, and so I will add, in 1997, him and a group of ALF and Equine Liberation Front activists went into Redmond, Oregon, where one of the last horse slaughterhouse existed in the U.S. They rounded up wild Mustangs from public lands and shipped babies and healthy adult horses in these giant trucks to Redmond, Oregon, and then while they were still alive, hung them up by 1 foot and slaughtered them to make them into dog food to ship to Japan. And the local community for years had tried to shut the place down. It had no wastewater treatment facilities, so on a regular basis, horse blood would bubble up from the stormwater drains onto the streets of Redmond, and the locals hated it, but they could not do anything to shut it down. And then Jonathan and a few other folks, staked the place out, did a bunch of surveillance, committed arson, burned the place down, and it was never opened again, and it was one of the last slaughterhouses in the U.S. And then 10 years later, a heroin addict who was also somebody that a lot of people in the movement knew, and he participated in the largest number of arsons in this entire conspiracy, got paranoid and walked into the FBI office thinking that the FBI was onto him, and said, give me $150,000 and promise not to send me to jail, and I'll tell you everything you want to know. And the FBI had no idea that the person sitting in front of them with a pentagram tattooed on his forehead, Jake Ferguson, was going to be able to spill the beans on over 20 unsolved arsons that had taken place over the West Coast. And it included the one that Jonathan was involved in and many others. After he made these disclosures as a heroin addict, pentagram tattooed nut job, he was not going to be a very credible witness in court. So they wired him up and sent him around the country to stroll down memory lane with his old friends, trying to get them to incriminate themselves on a wiretap. And one year, Ferguson showed up at an Earth First rendezvous and walked up to Jonathan, and the only reason I know this is because I had to read the transcripts and listen to all of these recordings, and he walked up to Jonathan and said, hey, have you been in touch with the family lately? And the family was this word that the FBI wanted Ferguson to use when entrapping people, because they wanted it to be associated with the Manson thing. So even though they never called themselves the family, that was no code word for this underground cell, he walks up to Jonathan and says, hey, have you been in touch with the family lately? And Jonathan's response is, oh yeah, how is your son these days? And says nothing on tape that would incriminate him. But unfortunately, he did manage to find a number of people who did make devastating admissions on tape. And part of the reason that a lot of people fell for this is he was a crusty gutter punk, tattooed, the last person that you would think would become a snitch for the FBI. And that is what made him powerful and incredibly useful to them. And as a result of those, that's when the largest roundup of Earth liberation and animal liberation activists occurred in the United States. And as a result of that, as Jonathan mentioned, 4 people held out for non-cooperation plea agreements. 8 more, at that time, entered into snitch deals, including one snitch who actually tried to get me prosecuted as one of the lawyers at one point. She was also my roommate, Lacey Philibon, just to on her. But as a result of that, for years, I would say, there was an incredible chill throughout the environmental and animal rights movement, particularly in the Northwest, as people were afraid of who to talk to, what was going on, who was next, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's been almost a decade in coming out of that, kind of dormant phase where people are feeling more confident to, get back engaged. Because despite the fact that you were either underground or above ground, it just didn't really matter. That level of repression and that level of fear had been really successful, which was likely what they were going after. Because it really wasn't a matter of keeping things safe. Most of these people, it had been 10 years. Some were in medical school, some were in law school, wildland firefighters and EMTs, they hadn't committed crimes in 10 years. They had moved on in their life. They were no longer a threat. But the idea was to make a big stink, make a very high-profile bust, and hope that it would scare the bejesus out of people for a long time. And one thing I often say is, when those types of attacks happen, the worst thing the movement can do is show the government that those attacks are successful. Because if they realize that what they're doing works, they will continue to do it over and over again. So you really need to figure out ways to address them responsibly and show support to people who are victims of it. But at the same time, at the time when this was going on, I would often do speaking things and say, really the best thing that you can do for these earth prisoners or animal prisoners is redouble your efforts for the environment and for the animals, and make sure that you're as strategic and effective as possible while these people sit on ice.
I think that one thing is, when you guys work on a campaign, one thing to help you, I'm not talking about, when I talk, don't think I'm just talking about doing underground illegal stuff, because I'm not. I'm just talking about in general as activists. When you guys are together, make sure you guys all communicate. Hey, if something comes down, we stick together. We don't talk to anyone until our lawyer comes here and we all get together. And that's what happened in the Green Scare thing. All these people, they didn't stick together and they all started talking. Until it was my time, I was like the 9th person arrested. By then, I was doomed. I was completely fucked by then. Really, I was pissed. I mean, I got completely screwed on this whole thing, and then they came back with an offer me. They said, if you testify with this one person, we'll give you 14 less months. And I said, nope, I'll take the 14 months. And I took the 14 months, and that last 14 months of my prison term were mine. I owned them because that was my choice, and it felt good because it was like, this is not really about me. This is a way bigger picture. So.
And the reality is that he can return to the movement that he loves, whereas people who choose to cooperate can never do that again.
I mean, personally, I would be dead because it's really. If I was a snitch, I'd have to kill myself. I couldn't do it because this is the most important thing to me. Is what we all feel here, And we're going to get repressed. We're going to talk about slap suits a little bit with Amanda and all that stuff. But they find all these different ways to go after us. We just got to keep moving forward, keep fighting them back because. The government and the corporations are way stronger than us. They're killing this planet, mass extinction. We're in big, deep, deep, deep trouble. I mean, if I had a freaking red alert like on Star Trek, I'd be blowing that thing off all the time. I mean, if you had a doomsday clock, we're 11:58. Okay, so we're in deep trouble. So you just got to keep pushing forward and keep fighting because you know what? And my last words are because the fight is the most honorable thing you can do. Whether you feel like you're going to actually accomplish something or not, in the big picture, maybe not, but it's the most honorable thing to do. So.
All right, so now we're going to turn to SLAP suits. SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation, and this is basically when corporations or industry sue activists or campaigns to try to shut them up or stop their activities. And I'm going to have Amanda cover this topic with some backup by me. And the reason I've asked her to cover this topic, it's funny, when she law clerked for me, we did research on SLAP suits, and we were gearing up to defend the tar sands blockade, which were some folks down in Texas that were fighting the KXL pipeline. And little did we know that a couple of years later, in her final year of law school, Amanda was going to become the target of a SLAP suit and currently has a SLAP suit going on against her, and she'll talk about that.
4 of them.
Yeah, 4 of them.
Wow.
Must be doing something right.
So SLAP suits, as Lauren said, strategic lawsuits against public participation, which that's kind of the overarching term for a variety of different lawsuits that might be filed against activists or campaigns, and it's kind of described as like corporation's best friend. If they're trying to stop a campaign or an activist in what they're doing, and they can't get you on any criminal charges, they can use civil stuff against you. And basically they're filing lawsuits against you because you're running an effective campaign that they're trying to shut down. So it's like stuff like injunctions, mine are protection orders against me. And it is civil, so there's not the threat of going to jail for it, unless, like, for me, if I were to violate the protection orders, then that can become a different issue. But it's usually something like, for me, I can't go within 150 feet of the office that we're protesting or certain people's homes. And then there's also the threat of financial sanctions, fines against you. For mine, I am supposed to be paying $80,000 in attorney's fees. So they use stuff
To the corporation's lawyers.
Yeah. Yeah. What my case is, I'm involved in the No New Animal Lab campaign, which is a campaign to stop the University of Washington and the construction corporation Skanska USA from building a new underground animal lab at the University of Washington. And so that, in addition to the campaign working on that, the campaign has also kind of took off in the animal liberation movement. As Lauren mentioned, we're kind of coming out of the impact of the Green Scare. This campaign, people are working on in over a dozen cities in the U.S. There's international involvement. It's most active. I've seen Seattle the whole time I've been doing activism there. And it's really amazing to see that as we are kind of, I feel like this is the first time since I've been doing activism where I feel this energy in the movement. And that's amazing, but now that is terrifying, I'm sure, to the University of Washington, to the construction company we're protesting, as well as to the research industry in general. So they are trying to find ways to stop it. And one of the tactics that we have been using protest on public sidewalks in front of Skonska's offices and at the homes of some of the executives who are very involved in the project. They picked me out as the leader because I was acting as police liaison at protest. And at one protest, they managed to follow me to my car and scan my license plate. And when they did that, they got a reading that the cops got a reading that said terrorist watch list. So with that stuff, and then taking things that had been set up.
Let's pause and remind everyone that she's never been arrested or convicted of a crime. She's a third-year law student with ample constitutional law background, and this is taking place.
Yeah. So with that stuff, then one day I got a knock at my door first thing in the morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it, and it was someone I didn't recognize, and she asked me if I was Amanda, and I said, "Who are you?" And she said, "Are you Amanda?" And I said, "Who are you?" And then she pulled out a badge that said like service agent or something on it, and she handed me a stack of papers, like literally that hundreds of pages of documents of me and other people, pictures of us at protest, us meeting for protest, like pictures that Private Eyes had taken, transcripts, but like people's declarations of like what supposedly had happened at protests at their houses. And this was from 4 different executives that we'd been protesting. There was stuff in there that was completely not true, that had never happened. There was stuff that other people had said that I hadn't said, and just, it was, reading it, I had a mixture of like couldn't decide whether I should laugh or cry reading it. Like the stuff they were saying about me, it was just like, it's weird to read that stuff about yourself in court documents. And so I called Lauren, of course, my first phone call, and she'll decide that I would be represented by a lawyer in Seattle. We went to court to fight the protection orders, arguing that I'm just engaging in free speech rights, protest on public sidewalks, no threats were used, and but the judge granted all 4 protection orders, said that I'm not allowed to go within 150 feet of those 4 people's houses, them or the Skonska office. And so now we are appealing that and have the support of CLDC. Lauren's on one of my lawyers for that, and I'm so glad to have like that support moving forward. And also with the campaign, to echo what's been said about like we can't let stuff stop us. Like I'm still very actively involved in the campaign. I am not violating the protection orders in any way, but there are so many other things I can be doing, and it's been amazing to see other people in Seattle and other cities continue to work on the campaign, and ultimately showing them that even though they may file stuff like this against us, the biggest thing is to show them that it's not going to work, it's not going to stop protest, it's not going to stop me from doing any thing that I can do. So that's my story, to the background of some of the other stuff I've been saying.
So a few things that I will hit on. Number one, as she mentioned, in a civil suit as opposed to a criminal suit, the case doesn't get started until someone comes and physically touches you with the paperwork. And that's what initiates a civil suit. You can't go to jail over a civil suit unless you violate things. It's really all about money and what are called injunctions. And an injunction means you can't go within 100 feet of something, or you can't do something. If you become the subject of a slap suit, normally in most states you have 30 days from the moment those papers touch you to start filing things. So the most important thing to know is, as soon as that happens to you, if it does happen to you, you need to contact a lawyer right away, because the process of an injunction is very, very fast. The traditional use of this legal mechanism is for like domestic violence cases, restraining orders you've probably heard about in TV. Well, she has a restraining order out against her from this corporate executive who doesn't want people on the sidewalk in front of his house, so his neighbors can see that he is enabling, a giant vivisection lab. So that's one thing to know. The other thing that we wanted to sort of point out is many states have what are called anti-SLAPP statutes, which are laws on the books that say First Amendment trumps corporate rights. And in Amanda's case, her Seattle lawyer filed a motion, an argument saying that constitutional rights trump. Public sidewalks are First Amendment forums. Free speech is free speech, is protected speech. But the way this corporation got around that is by lying and exaggerating what the lawful protest was and making it seem like it had crossed the line from protected free speech onto harassment. And because it was their word against activist word, the judge erred on the side of caution, which is generally what they do in restraining order cases. If husband and wife, are making allegations about abuse, it's probably a good practice to err on the side of caution and grant a restraining order. But in this case, it's big bad corporation against small demure law student, and it was probably fairly unjust in it. But once that judge granted that order, she's stuck with that now until the appellate process goes through, which is just slow as molasses. So she's bound up in that. And the one other thing I just wanted to mention about her case in particular, I don't think it's any accident that they managed to target the future lawyer. And I just want to say, lawyers and people that have specialty value to a movement also become prime targets, because there are many fewer of us out there than others. And to take out this mouthpiece, is a major blow to the future, of the ability to support the movement. And so I don't doubt at all that the targeting of her as a defendant was very strategic on behalf of the vivisection industry as a whole. Because, of course, we have our movements and listservs, and these industries and laboratories and vivisectors all have their own listservs, and they're sharing tactics and tools as well. So I just wanted to kind of show you a little bit. Eleanor Fairchild is a landowner down in Texas. She did not want the KXL pipeline running through her ranch, and she chose to oppose it and became the victim of a slap suit. And this is, in the state of Texas, this is what the start of a slap suit looks like. This is basically the summons that says you are hereby commanded to appear on this particular day. This is basically the announcement, like, you're being sued. Show up on this day, which was 2 weeks after she received these papers, and get ready to defend yourself against TransCanada, a multinational corporation out of Canada who's responsible for most of the tar sands extraction and pipelines in the U.S. right now.
To just highlight, the corporations doing this stuff, like TransCanada, huge corporation, Skanska, who's doing this to me. They are one of the biggest construction companies in the world, multi-billion-dollar revenue. Their U.S. headquarters is a full floor of the Empire State Building. Giant corporations, and this is their desperate attempt to stop grassroots activists. And in one way, as I said, if you're experiencing this from corporations, hopefully it means you're doing something right. But it also shows that as grassroots activists, we have the power to push corporations into feeling like this, and we are having an impact on what they're doing.
And I think the counter to that is, those corporations have staff attorneys that are making bazillions of dollars, and it's no skin off their ass to start jamming out, really crappy legal documents. I mean, the complaints and stuff that were filed in this looked like something that a ninth grader wrote up, spelling errors and everything. At one point, they had actually sent us an old version of the complaint that showed 20 names listed as defendants. They had forgotten to go back and extract all of those and leave only her.
My name is spelled wrong.
Yeah, her name was spelled wrong, even though they clearly had done a lot of recon on her. But, the flip side to it is, little activist with little campaign with little money, basically has to rely on pro bono legal support. We do not have the staff attorneys that these corporations have, and it's a huge financial toll on these campaigns and on individual activists, and that is the other high motivation that they have. It doesn't matter if these cases are frivolous. It doesn't matter if we ultimately win them, which 9 out of 10 times we do win them. To them, it's all about trying to bog down activists, run the campaign, divert attention, et cetera, et cetera. There was a slap suit here in Portland a few years ago against Schumacher Furs, with some activists that were protesting in front of a fur store. Ultimately, they won that slap suit against the fur store owner and were able to get all of their attorney fees and costs paid for by the fur store. That is the usual that we see in activist land regarding slap suits. So even though we have a victim of so far a successful one, it's actually really rare that slap suits prevail against activists. But this document actually is the temporary restraining order and permanent injunction against Eleanor Fairchild, this 80-year-old rancher, from being able to walk on her own property. She was enjoined from walking on a swath of her own property where they wanted to take the property and make it into this pipeline. And the reason, unfortunately, that this ended up like this is because they didn't know that they only had 30 days to get lawyers and go to court. And the 30-day time period went by, and then they contacted us, and we immediately got involved. The rules down there say you can ask the court for permission to file late motions, and Texas actually has a great anti-SLAPP statute, so we would have prevailed, but the judge, whose entire retirement pension is tied up in oil and gas, that's their entire pension system is oil and gas, chose to exercise his discretion and did not allow us to file any briefs. So all of these folks were stuck with this injunction by TransCanada. And these are just a few things that I wanted to highlight. As Amanda said, sometimes it's comical. This case is quite simple, said the introduction. Under the auspices of nonviolent direct action, the defendants, all of whom are members of, affiliated with, or acting under the banner of the tar sands blockade group, which they never call themselves that, have engaged in acts of eco-terrorism through their coordinated, orchestrated, and ongoing unlawful conduct, and have trespassed upon Keystone's property, which they stole, have interfered with construction of Keystone's pipeline, and or threatened additional interference with Keystone's construction. Basically what they did is they erected a few tree sits in the trees that were about to be bulldozed down the pipeline, and a few people locked onto the pipe and crawled into the pipe and did very typical civil disobedience along this pipeline route. And that was the eco-terrorism that they engaged in.
And they really like to try and pull in that kind of language and paint us as that. Like in mine, everywhere it says my name when they're talking about me. The court document says Amanda Schemkes on a terrorist watch list, like consistently. And you see how they're trying to paint us for the court. So that's just something to keep in mind when you are thinking about how you're organizing your campaigns and how you want protests to come across, what rhetoric you're using. Think about how they're going to paint stuff in the court document.
And in this case, TransCanada attempted to make the tar sands blockade, shut down their website, not talk naughty about the KXL pipeline, and they tried to do all sorts of crazy things. Luckily, we were able to negotiate with this team of devils from Canada and got all of the First Amendment crap taken away. But ultimately, everybody was restrained from going within 150 feet of the pipeline route. And these are all the people that got named in the suit. And where did TransCanada get these names? The cops were all too willing to hand over arrest records and other documents, photos they had taken at lawful actions.
To a private corporation.
To a private corporation, yeah.
Also, don't ever doubt that the cops are working with these people. Some of the protests where I had activist police liaison, the cops come to us being like, oh, we're just checking on stuff. We got a call, but it looks like everything you guys are doing is legal. It's okay. Then when I got the police reports from the restraining orders, after saying that to me, they went to the person we were protesting and told him to file the restraining orders against me. So don't be fooled by if you think the cops are like trying to play nice or something.
And just to point out, in the criminal context, the burden of proof is that the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you did the illegal thing. That means to a moral certainty. They have to prove what you did. In the civil context, it's a much lower standard. It's more likely than not. Is it more likely than not that maybe she did these things? So when they don't think they can win in the criminal courts because of that higher standard, then they go down to sloppy seconds, basically, and file these civil suits with the lesser burden. So, like I said, in Texas, this was what the judge ordered. That they, they're the defendant, any agents, servants, employees, assignees, designees, members, or any person in active concert or participation with the defendants. So not just those people named, but anyone acting with them was now enjoined from going within the 150 feet of the pipeline. So Texas, the tar sands blockade, at first was like, well, shit, our campaign has just been killed. And it only took a couple of days for people to, get together and figure out all the different ways that they could continue to be effective regardless of this. So this is a picture of my dear friend Ramsey Sprague, a Texas native. He was one of the people enjoined. And the tar sand, or the TransCanada and a bunch of oil and gas I almost used a bad word, but oil and gas people got together at a fancy hotel to give speeches and rah-rah themselves about, extracting the natural resources off of our planet. Ramsey dressed up in a business suit and put on his best cowboy hat and walked into the thing, walked right up to the podium as if he was the guest lecturer. Took the mic and thanked everyone for coming, welcomed them to the event, and then began to tell them what pieces of shit they were in very polite language and how they were raping Mother Earth and all of these other things. It took about 20 minutes before the audience caught on that he was actually the invited guest. And part of the reason that they finally got the light bulb on is that he managed to take out a bunch of chain and lock himself to the podium while he was talking to them. Totally interrupted their fancy conference, didn't violate his restraining order. He did get a little trespassing charge and did some community service for it, but just one example of how, when they give you lemons, make lemonade out of it. A very good adage for the future. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I love that.
So I guess the long story short is, yep, government repression happens, but our movements, both historically and in the current days, find ways to deal with it, overcome it, and continue the struggle for animal and environmental liberation. And with that, we will open it up to questions and discussion. Well, since you were the fastest hand up, we'll start with you.
Couldn't we use the same tactics back on them, file civil suits using the same exact language that they used for what they're actually doing, and have a person who doesn't have anything to lose file the class action suit?
Well, number one, if you file a frivolous lawsuit, both the lawyer and the people can be in big trouble for fines and costs and fees and things like that. So it would have to be something real. But I file the equivalent of restraining orders against timber companies and other things all the time. When we challenge timber sales, we always file injunctions as part of them, which stops them from being able to log or mine or slaughter horses or whatever it is. So we do use that mechanism. It'd be a little more challenging for Amanda to file a slap suit against, or not a slap suit, but a civil action against Skanska because they are not coming within her personal sphere and allegedly criminally harassing her. But it's possible. It just is a matter of whether or not that's a good strategy and whether it's a good use of resources, I would say.
Was it optional to do the appellate stage of the follow-up?
Yeah, it has been our choice to move forward with the appeals. That was something that my Seattle lawyer asked me about when we were deciding that. She's like, now are you sure you want to do this? Pros, cons of it. And I was like, well, right now I have 4 protection orders against me, and I owe their lawyers $80,000. Like, yes, I want to go forward with the appeal.
Oh, that's what you have to pay.
I currently owe them $80,000, so I'm really hoping that gets overturned.
And just the bad precedent, you know. Yeah. It's basically criminalized lawful protest on public sidewalks, so we didn't want to let that stand either.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things. Like, from the beginning of this hasn't just been about me. It's about the campaign as well as the broader movement. And when we are facing repression, we need to fight back as hard as we can against that and not let them get anything against it.
from everything I've heard you say, especially from what I've heard Jonathan say, it seems to me pretty clear now that the more we know about how they operate and what our rights are and how much we teach each other, remind each other, the more powerful we're going to be.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing is we need to make sure that it's clear to them that these tactics don't work. So like, for instance, in the worst case scenario, if Amanda ends up owing $80,000, it would be great for Bob Barker to write her a check for $80,000 so it's no skin off her ass to pay them off and move on with her life. No impact. I think that's incredibly important that they know that these tactics will not deter people or activists from continuing their work.
Well, that's part of the importance of having a movement where we take care of each other. Like, it sucks right now that there are protests I can't go to and stuff, and there are times when I feel less connected. So, when we have situations where there are people who, whether it's, something like restraining order or they're in jail or whatever it is, that we are making sure that they are still part of the community, like the importance of like writing to prisoners, making sure that we are always taking care of each other.
Yeah. Putting money on people's commissary accounts, making sure people's animals are taken care of if they are going to jail for grand juries. All of that solidarity work and support is incredibly important. Want to say anything about that?
Well, one thing I noticed when I was in prison was the animal rights movement has a way better prison support system than the environmental movement. So the environmental movement can improve on that a lot. There's the animal rights movement there was a lot of support for me, and I got a lot of letters. And the other thing too is I also wrote everyone back. I wrote group letters back to everyone, because I really felt like I wanted to respond to everyone, which is hard to do when you get like 30 letters a day. But yeah, I mean, good on the animal rights movement for what they've done. It really showed me like the solidarity within the animal rights movement. It was hardly any. The only people who were in the environmental movement who wrote me were people that were my friends, which is fine. It was great, but so on that end, that could improve. It's not very much to write a card or someone to one of the prisoners out there. It doesn't take very long. I actually had pen pals. All from young people to I think this one woman wrote me was probably in her late 60s, and we wrote every month, right back and forth. And so I think that it doesn't take much to really keep people's spirits alive when you're in prison. So a simple letter, a card, is really awesome. When I was in the grand jury prison jail for the grand juries back in the 90s, I got this card and had a picture of a wheat farm in Washington. It was like a silo with a bunch of wheat growing. I'm like, turn around, it says, "We wheat farmers support you." And that's all it said, and I was like, this is really bizarre, but it's really cool at the same time. I mean, it was like, because actually I was fighting the government. So despite the fact that I was an AR person, all the right-wingers there was this kind of mixed confluence of people that were coming and supporting me because I was standing up to the government saying, I'm not talking to you anything, I'm not going to say nothing, screw you. And so it was kind of interesting, but yeah.
That brings up a question for me. Are you familiar with cell death? Mm-hmm. And maybe you want to, I don't know if you want to say anything about it. Do you think this is something that's really important for everybody who's in all of these movements to know about and become familiar with?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's not just environmental and animal rights activists that are targeted with this type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess what I just want to say is this is about community rights, organizing for community rights. And if you're not familiar with it, it's really important to know about the movements to do this. I think there are 4 counties in Oregon now who are doing that. It's a way of basically stopping all harm, corporate harm.
We'll be discussing this more next week in Portland at the Unitarian Church. I'm doing a thing on ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. So if you want more info about that, it's called ALEC Exposed. And one thing I just wanted to show quickly, because I wasn't going to show it, but this is, I didn't get into the fact that, nowadays corporations and industries like Peabody Coal or these large corporations, they don't want to be the ones seen going after activists and spying on campaigns and stuff like that. So the corporations have set up separate entities that are part PR firm and part spy agency. So they're mostly ex-FBI agents working with publicity people. And the ex-FBI agents go out and spy on the communities, and then the PR people write up things like terrorist bulletins and circulate them to the industry and law enforcement and FBI. And this is a letter written by one of those entities called Themis on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. U.S. Chamber of Commerce was spying on a little whistleblowing group called Chamber Watch that just monitored what was going on inside the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and did a website, basically. And this letter, it's hard to see, but they have painted out what their strategy is for taking down this organization. Paint U.S. Chamber Watch as an operative of the unions, while at the same time highlighting the organization of the unions against the chamber. We should also show the flow of members from unions, as well as the closeness, of those organizations. Craft a message to combat the messaging propaganda of U.S. Chamber Watch. For example, target how the unions are being used in these particular ways. And basically they come up with like a media spin campaign against them. Create a false document, perhaps highlighting periodic financial information, and monitor to see if U.S. Chamber Watch acquires it. Afterward, when they go to the media and say, hey, look at this document we found, present explicit evidence proving that such transactions never occurred. Also, create a fake insider persona and generate communications with Chamber Watch. Afterward, release the actual documents at a specified time and explain why Chamber Watch is a contrived operation. Both instances will prove that U.S. Chamber Watch cannot be trusted with information and/or to tell the truth. So they're basically trying to malign the organization intentionally. Connect U.S. Chamber Watch's radical tactics, they ran a website, to Velvet Revolution, explaining that both entities are loosely operating together. Depending on the level of connection established, such an approach may need to be spotlighted as more of a conspiracy rather than a separate vocal persona. If needed, create two fake insider personas, using one as leverage to discredit the other while confirming the legitimacy of the second. Such work is complicated, but a well-thought-out approach will give way to a variety of strategies that can sufficiently aid the formation of taking down the U.S. Chamber Watch. And then finally, create a humor piece about the leaders of the Chamber Watch. So this is actually a document that we got through FOIA because they were sending this crap to law enforcement agencies and FBI. And once the private corporations sent their shit to the public, government agencies, then we were able to access it through public records requests. So that's just an example of how corporations are currently operating and spying on activists and what they intend to do with that info. And of course, be very well assured that somebody gets paid big bucks, 40 hours a week to do nothing but this. So when you think about the successes that our volunteer movements have had in the face of this type of crap, you can, see how fortunate we are to be part of these movements.
I think that is the corporate entities. Probably some of them are in denial, too, about what's going on in the world, but I think there's people that really know what's going on. They're going to get more defensive because these are the people that are creating the big problems that we're having right now. And as it gets worse and worse, and then people push them, they're going to get more defensive. Having said that, I think one of the tactics they also use against people is they keep using the word eco-terrorism, which I have a real issue with that word for a couple reasons. I've been called it a number of times, like too many times, but one way I started doing it is when we were starting called that way, I would just call them back on it. I was like, I think you should realize that you're really the real eco-terrorist here. I mean, you're the one that's raping this planet. So that's terrorism right there. So, because governments believe it. If you say that the climate is maybe not changed, it's probably not human, it's some natural thing, and you say that enough on Fox News and all their other, propaganda outlets they have, the stupid people in the world begin to believe it, and there's a lot of stupid people out there. There really is. That's why we get a lot of Republican votes, because they have the stupid vote. Okay, so the more they say it, the more believe it. So if to counter that, maybe you should just throw it back in their face. Yeah. I mean, that's one option you can do. I hate using the word terrorism. There is a place for terrorism in this world, but that word has become completely abused and completely used for propaganda purposes also by the bigger terrorists, the governments, the corporations, the ones who are really guilty of it. So the hypocrisy that's going on is big time. Maybe it's time we slap it back in their face.
Other questions or comments?
Not physically, though, because that would be assault.
So if a corporation hires a group like feminists to compile information about individuals to prepare a slap suit, are there any limits as to like the kind of spying that they can do that will or will not, and like that will hold up in court, versus like the spying that like an actual law enforcement agency can do? Like, are there any limits to like private spying and how that information can be used, basically?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, government spies are required to comply with the U.S. Attorney General guidelines on surveillance. There's actually rules written down that are challenged in court and are supposed to comply with the Constitution and civil rights. But private spies are not held to those guidelines at all. However, there are laws on the books, like you can't break and enter someone's home, you can't steal things or stuff like that. But often, no one is going to enforce those rules against them because the state and these entities are usually in cahoots. So corporate spies, in my opinion, are generally more abusive of the rights of private citizens than the government agents. It's just that in order for them to use their information to send people to jail, they have to get the government spies to buy into it. And if they have obtained evidence illegally, that evidence is not going to be admissible in court. But what they are most interested in with that illegally gained evidence is smear campaigns, extortion, blackmail, things of that nature. And just to kind of give you a funny story, one of my clients had the experience. One morning, he was involved in an animal rights campaign for a long time, and one morning they were going to the airport really early in the morning, and they met the garbage collectors at the foot of the driveway, and one of the garbage men said to them, "Why do you guys put out an empty garbage can every week?" And shortly thereafter, they had been indicted, and we found out in discovery that for a year, the feds in an FBI SUV would show up and dump their garbage can into the back of the SUV and speed away. And they weren't looking for evidence of a crime. They weren't even looking for notes and plans. They were looking to prove that they weren't really vegan. They were looking for hot dog wrappers. They were reading the food wrappers, trying to see if there was whey or casein in anything. And they didn't find anything, gosh darn it. But that was what their focus was in every single week, dumping this guy's garbage into the back of a federal vehicle. Other questions?
I know we're getting close on time, so before we end this, I do want to make the acknowledgement that we're talking about a lot of stuff that can sound scary and it's stressful, and that's something that we need to acknowledge with all of this, the possibility of things like going to jail, being thousands of dollars in debt, having restraining orders against you. It is stressful stuff to deal with, and that's part of that big need to take care of each other. For me, it's meant the world to have friends that are you can call me at any time when I'm freaking out at 2 a.m. about something, and just those little things, letting people know, if you need anything, I'm here for you, and we can all do that for each other. And then we also need to take those feelings of those stressed out and those moments when we're scared to acknowledge that, but then use that as part of our motivation to fight back even harder. It is fucked up that that's what they do to us, because we're trying to protect animals and this earth, and we need to use all of that as more power to fight back against them.
And we need to take ourselves more seriously. In many ways, this is a very serious matter. It's life and death. And a lot of times activists have kind of treated it as a hobby or an interest, for a couple of months or a couple of, years. But, I think that we do need to take ourselves more seriously because they are taking us much more seriously.
And as Lauren kind of mentioned earlier, they're putting in their 40 hours a week, big paychecks and everything. How many of us put in 40 hours a week? And, they're destroying the earth. What are we going to do to save it? We literally are talking about, this is it. This is critical moment. What are we going to do standing at this point?
And I just put up this slide as maybe the last one. So TransCanada came out with a PowerPoint presentation, and they traveled around the pipeline route and met with law enforcement and prosecutors and government agents and gave a PowerPoint presentation that included photos and descriptions of the leaders of the movement. Two of these folks are Rising Tide North America organizers. And then they also provided information to these people about the charges they could potentially bring against activists. Don't forget these arcane federal laws that nobody uses, but you could use them against these guys if you wanna. So this was sort of evidence of the collusion between corporations and the state at all different levels. And then, in the last panel we did some security culture, and I mentioned face crack. So this is one of the ways that corporations track who knows who and how all of these different people are tied together and how they psychologically profile and whatnot. This was them trying to map out the Gas Drilling Awareness Coalition, which was their own word for basically anti-pipeline activists. But they literally, come up with these little things and try to tie people together and activities and campaigns. And, we're all part of this great conspiracy to save the planet. And what do we have? Is that it? Okay, so 10 after was our time, and we're a couple minutes past that, so we want to give you all time to get to your next workshops. And then just to mention, 4 o'clock. Is that right? I think the last workshop of the day, I think it's...
No.
Is it?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, at 2:20,
Oh,
we will be upstairs in room 333 with navigating the system for Repression.
Yeah, so room 333 in this next slot, we're doing a panel on what activists need to know if they end up being defendants or, if they end up in the legal system, how to work with your lawyers. Thank you all for coming.
This week you heard
Silver Splinter by Caribou.
Right now you're listening to
Natural Cause by Emancipator.
Just wanted to give a big shout out to everyone who went in and rated the show on iTunes. Thank you so much. If you have a second, just, log into your favorite podcast aggregator. You're probably there now listening to this thing. And, go give us a rating and review. It helps out the show tremendously. It just makes it easier for listeners like you to find it. So, thank you in advance. And if you've already done it, thank you again.
Speaking of thanks, thank you for following us. If you're already doing that, if you're not, then you should follow us on social media. I always have to do a segue. It doesn't feel right if I don't.
I don't follow us on social media. Is that bad?
Yeah, you probably should.
But I'd have to get social media just to follow.
Well, there is a secret social media that you're on that some people have found you on.
That's true. That is true.
So follow us and follow Jeremy on Instagram. Just go to whichsidepodcast.com and click on the social tab. We often post things on there that we don't talk about on the show. Often pretty much means every day, all the time. So check it out. whichsidepodcast.com. Click on the social tab.
And fuck shit damn.
And fuck shit damn yourself too.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.